Good day, everyone. Today we will be discussing the laboratory policies or guidelines. The presenter will be Mr. Reynard Jules Kison and yours truly, Mr. Prince Liam Lat. So to start with, we will be discussing the purpose of lab policy. So what is the purpose of laboratory policies? Developing laboratory policies and guidelines is one of the most important things that can be done to protect the individuals who are working inside the laboratory. It ensures that hazards have been identified, minimized, or fully prevented, and that everyone knows what to do in an emergency. As we enter the laboratory, we must be acknowledged on the hazards in the lab. So now, we will give you the laboratory policies and guidelines for you to become aware and to avoid the laboratory hazards. First thing we need to remember is to always wear appropriate personal protective equipment. In the laboratory, it is really important to wear appropriate personal protective equipment such as gloves, lab gown, head cap, safety goggles, and closed shoes to avoid contamination and chemical hazards. Next, all guidelines for chemical storage must be followed at all times. All chemicals must be labeled with the chemical name, hazard warning, quantity, creation date, and individual responsible. Chemicals must also be kept close until they are needed. This will help individuals to avoid mistakes in mixing chemicals. Also, this will help individuals to be aware and knowledgeable on the first aid that they can do in case of emergency. Next, familiarizing. Familiarize the location of all exits as well as the fire extinguisher, evacuation route, safety shower, eye wash, and first aid kit. This will help individuals to avoid such greater damage and it will be useful in case of emergency, such as having fire during laboratory and to avoid larger damage in eyes if the chemical explodes. Next, the long hair must be tied back and any dangling accessories must be removed. Long hair must be tied up because it can be dragged through chemicals in beakers or open flames, such as Bunsen burner, or get caught in equipment. Then accessories must be removed to avoid skin injuries or skin allergy that can be caused by the chemicals that are trapped under the jewelry. Next, all laboratory materials such as chemicals, glassware, and equipment must be stored and disposed properly. This is important because it will prevent contamination for everyone. To continue, here is Mr. Kizon.
Oh, hello guys. I'm Reinhard Jules Kison of Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering 2-1. Um, let's start. Change gloves when contaminated and dispose of used gloves with other contaminated laboratory waste. All of the times, gloves, dress codes in the laboratory is mostly disposable. So every gloves that we will use and we touch in the laboratory experiment, we need to dispose them as soon as possible and change another new because laboratories can provide many gloves as we can. Okay, next. Wash your hands after working with potentially hazardous materials and before leaving the laboratory. Before we enter the laboratory, we also need to wash our hands before we touch the hazardous materials or before we do the experiments. And also always before we leaving we need to wash our hands, take time, wait with the reaction of the chemical with the skin that touches, and let's see what will happen. Thank you. Next, do not ink do I do not eat, drink, smoke, handle contact lenses, apply cosmetics, or store food for human consumption in the laboratory. Any anyone knows that rule because it is laboratory experiment time and every chemical is in there that in that room. is hazardous. So who don't know that we cannot eat, drink, or smoke, or sometimes handle contact lenses, apply cosmetics in our faces, or even when where stomach is aching. Do not bring food in laboratory for human consumption, please. Thank you. Next, decontaminate all potential infectious materials before disposal. Even though the materials is even though all the materials in the laboratory is most disposable, we cannot just throw them in the trash or leave in one side, because we didn't know how far that will travel just to dispose that thing. So before disposal or before getting into the junk, we need to contaminate all the potential infectious materials, or what we call chemicals in that material, because it's dangerous, because maybe we don't know that the infectious materials is flammable with the sun heat. So when that material traveling going to the garbage, when he's most exposed the sun, it causes fire. So we know that we need to dispose that materials, but before we dispose, we need to decontaminate. Thank you. Next, please. Report any incidents that may result in exposure to infectious materials to appropriate personnel. Examples, laboratory supervisors, safety officer. Because we're not that expert of doing first aid or save our classmates or save our co-workers in that laboratory. So we need to report that, and don't be mindful that every time or every accidents that will happen, please report that, because we're not that expert to doing things that saves lives, like laboratory supervisor or safety officer. Thank you. Be disciplined in laboratory. Thank you.
So, for the conclusion, individuals who work in laboratories are exposed to a variety of risks, particularly when handling chemicals. Therefore, it must be needed to remember that all chemicals are really dangerous substance because they are all toxic in some way. So this is our references. You may check it on your own to prove. So that concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening.